All right, that was the prosecution's opening statement in the Denise Williams trial. Let's break down what we see so far. And joining me on our new set is trial attorney Brad Micklin. Brad, welcome to our new Law and Crime set.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, I got to ask you, this is a little bit of a weird case. Have you ever seen an immunity deal quite like this before? Because we really wouldn't have had a case if it wasn't for Brian Winchester. We wouldn't have found Mike's remains if it wasn't for Brian. But at the same point, to be granted immunity when he said he shot him in the face? Have you ever seen that before?
No, I was surprised. I mean, you know, there's always a lot of advantages to plea bargains. Obviously, it reduces the cost and difficulty. It gets two criminals off the street as opposed to just Brian, who was facing the kidnapping charge. And it helps the family get some closure. But I also think it sends a very bad message to people that are committing heinous crimes that, well, if you just cooperate, and we're not even sure if his cooperation was genuine or not, where he says there was a conspiracy. There's still some questions about that. So I think it sends a very bad message to people committing crimes like this, that maybe if they bring somebody else in, they can just walk forward.
And they have to realize if they don't get a guilty verdict for Denise Williams, no one would be held responsible for the murder of Mike Williams. Now, what I hear you saying is if you're sitting on the defense counsel, you really want to pick at Brian Winchester's testimony in that immunity deal. Which brings me to the defense's opening statement. Now it's their turn to say Denise Williams, she had nothing to do with this. Take a look.
And good morning.
Good morning.
Let me begin by saying that there is no dispute about the fact that Mike Williams was murdered. The evidence is going to show beyond any doubt that he was shot in the face and killed by Brian Winchester, a man he thought was his friend. Brian Winchester is not on trial. In fact, he's never even been charged with the murder. He's going to testify here as a witness, and there's an important part of that you haven't heard yet that will be in evidence, and I want to tell you about it, and that's the fact that he is going to be testifying under a grant of immunity. And what that means in this particular case, the kind of immunity that was given to him, is that he will be able to testify as he pleases about this without any fear that the state will be able to use that testimony against him. Occurred. I think when you hear the evidence, you're going to have some questions about whether it happened, he said it happened, whether it happened the way he said it happened. But what I think is not in question is that it did in fact shoot and kill Mike Williams. You're not going to hear from any witness who said they saw them in a private setting. You're not going to see credit card receipts for dinners or hotel bills. What you're going to hear, and all you're going to hear, is that Brian Winchester claims he was having an affair with Denise Williams.
All right, Brad, you tell me. Good opening defense?
I don't know. I mean, the defense itself is good. I don't think he did a great job in presenting it. I think he should have really hammered more on Brian's incentive to possibly lie, and that there's no repercussions if he does.
You know, we talk so much about Brian. Let's play him. When we come back from our break, we are going to play the testimony of the key witness, Brian Winchester. We'll be right back. Okay, so Brad, one of the weird aspects about this case is you would think the affair really wouldn't be an issue. Just take it for what it is. But when we interviewed Ethan Way, Denise Williams' defense attorney, he said there was no affair. So the idea of proving an affair became an issue in this case. I was surprised to see that. Were you?
I was, too, because if there was this affair that Brian was just testifying about, there would be tons of proof. There would be hotel receipts, plane tickets, phone records, text messages. And if there's nothing, then that goes to the heart of whether there's cooperation or not.
Do you think, though, that it even served them to fight that aspect? Why not just admit, yeah, she had an affair, doesn't mean she's a murderer?
Well, because then it gives her incentive. Because remember, not only did she get this insurance money, but Brian wrote the policies. So it ties them together when he's writing the policies. If they're having an affair at that same time, then it would look like they conspired.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I want to talk about that now, the life insurance. And when Brian Winchester, this admitted killer, went on the stand, he explained a little bit more of Denise's motive. Take a look.
Him having more coverage. I mean, there was a lot of conversations
behind the scenes as to getting that new policy.
In all honesty, having a larger policy of $1 million on a man who's married, kids, making income isn't necessarily abnormal.
It's not. It wasn't extravagant based on the income that he was making.
But nonetheless, there was conversations, and he elected to have $1 million policy.
Right. He wasn't real. I think to him it was a lot of money. I think he even had conversations with Mr. Ketchum about it. But he eventually decided, and I think with Denise's encouragement, decided to go ahead and get that extra $1 million policy.
And when was that?
When did he get the policy?
Yes, sir.
I get a little confused because he had one policy that was issued that actually we didn't get the premium paid or something, and so he actually had a second policy, same thing, same company, same everything. I think there was only like a 3-month gap in between that, but it was within I think 6 months to a year before his death occurred.
You mentioned another policy.
Let's go sidebar for just a second. We don't need the court.
What a guy. Sold his best friend a life insurance policy and then shot him in the face. Now, Brad, you listen to this, right? And I can sit back and say, I understand the motivation for Denise Williams to want to get rid of Mike Williams. What's his motivation, really? Because I'm not sure that was so clear.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it depends what the affair was like. I mean, if he was passionately in love with this woman, then that's his incentive.
Is that enough?
Well, but also remember, he married years later, and even though he doesn't get the actual proceeds from the policy, he gets the benefit of living with a person who does, and maybe that was what motivated him.
Do you think he's faring well so far on the stand? There was a little bit of emotion. I mean, he's sitting there, and in our next break, right after our next break, we're going to play his confession. So how do you think he's doing?
It's hard to say because he's more emotional than maybe he would be. I mean, this is, 18 years later?
Yeah.
So he's emotional, but not overly emotional. But it's hard to balance and figure out what he's really trying to accomplish at this point.
You have to believe that he's credible in the sense that he led authorities to Mike's remains 17 years later. We would never have known that if it wasn't for him.
Well, that part's credible. But the point that's the real issue of this case is whether or not Denise conspired with him to murder him or if he did it on his own.
Do you think that's tough to prove?
It's normally not, because, again, if you had this long-standing affair, there would be witnesses, there would be plane tickets, there would be phone records, text messages. There would be an abundance of proof if there was any kind of contact between them.
But she was charged with murder, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact. Those are 3 different things. Right. And that's not so easy to prove all 3.
But if they can prove that they had a long-standing close affair before the murder or around the time of the insurance proceeds, I think you can tie it together then.
Don't you need her to show some sort of overt act to help him in the murder?
Well, for conspiracy, yes. But
what is it?
I don't know. From what I've learned about the case, it's supposed to be that she allowed him to go hunting on their anniversary. I guess it's an act by omission, not stopping him. I just think it's very weak, though.
So you're saying putting the victim in an area where he could be killed, that could be considered first-degree murder, that can be considered conspiracy?
That's what they're trying to prove. I don't think it's the fair way to do it. I mean, not that I want to treat murder defendants too fairly, but I think you need something more than not stopping somebody from doing something that might have been ordinary and customarily for them.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear the confession from Brian Winchester. And not only that, he's going to talk about how Denise had cold feet before the plot. Take a look. We'll be back.
But I remember now that that area of the lake had a lot of snags, a lot of dead trees that come up out of the water, and there's a lot of stumps that come up out of the water. And he swam over to one of those stumps and held on to it. And he was panicking, and I was panicking, and none of this was like going how I thought it was going to go. And I didn't know what to do. But he started to yell, And I didn't know how to get out of that situation. And so I had my gun in the boat. And so I loaded my gun, and I made 1 or 2 circles around, and I ended up circling closer towards him, and he was in the water. And as I passed by, I shot him.
Oh, you don't know how to get out of that situation? How about don't shoot him in the face? Brad, when you listen to this, does it get more evil? He kills his best friend in cold blood.
Well, it's horrible. I mean, aside from it was premeditated and they discussed all the time, but his plan obviously was to push him and let him be eaten by the alligators. But thankfully, he brought a gun and made sure that he could finish the job in case it wasn't successful. It's just rotten.
Have you seen these kinds of cases before where the first idea to try to kill someone doesn't work out and then they just do whatever they need to do? And let's not forget, you could argue this was a successful crime because the body was never found, which is, I think, miraculous for him.
Well, I think that's part of why there was the conspiracy or after the fact sentence or crime for Denise, because of the cover-up of the body and relocating the body.
How's it possible that remains cannot be found for 17 years? I'm not sure I still understand that fact from this case.
Well, I think because of the gators and the wood, I think they called the search off early. And I think that Brian had moved the body and hid it, obviously, and given that it would be so hard to find somebody in a swamp full of alligators, I didn't think they searched too long.
What's interesting about this case, though, is sometimes when somebody's caught up in another crime, remember he was facing life in prison for armed assault, he led investigators to another crime. You see that happen a lot, right?
Oh, it's very common, because, look, if somebody's going to be that heinous to arm and rob somebody or kidnap somebody at gunpoint, there's a very good chance they've committed crimes in the past. And it's almost like they get to save it up and buy their way out of it by committing more.
Yeah, let's play a little bit more of Brian Winchester on the stand, the admitted killer. Take a look.
So when I shot him, it was dark, and there was a bright flash when that happened. And I didn't want to see what happened, so I closed my eyes when the instant of that flash happened. And the boat was moving as this happened, and so I turned back around and came back to where he was and got to the stump. And I knew I couldn't leave him there being shot. So I was going to have to do something to cover this up. And I reached down, and he wasn't far under the water, but like my whole arm got wet. And I remember wondering, how am I going to explain that my arm is soaking wet? And I was afraid I was going to have to jump into the water. But I reached down, and I grabbed a hold of him, and I was closer, because of where I had driven the boat, I was closer to another landing, just a little dirt landing that was further down the shoreline. And so I decided to motor the boat and pull him over to that landing over there. So I drug him in the water.
It's not every day you have someone describing in graphic detail a murder quite like this. Now, Brad, if I'm sitting here, sitting on the jury, do I have any reason to believe any of what he's saying is not true?
No, I mean, there's no reason for him to lie. The jury doesn't understand that if he is found to be lying or his story changes, that his plea agreement may fail. They don't know that, so they're going to believe everything he says. And he's emotional even after all these years.
Now, I want to go back to that plea agreement. I still can't quite understand. If the prosecution cannot secure a successful verdict against Denise Williams, then no one would be held responsible for Mike's murder. Is that a concern? If that happened to you, would he look at the state and say, how on earth could you make this plea deal?
I think a lot of people are going to do that. I mean, the thing about Florida, though, is their punishment for murder is either life without parole or death. So there's a lot of reason why a person would never plea or admit to any crime without having some kind of favorable plea arrangement. But this, I think, was too favorable. He's going to serve less time for committing two offenses, two horrible offenses, than for the one crime.
What can we expect under cross-examination of this guy?
If I were going to cross-examine him, I'd want to show that he has every incentive to lie, that he has no proof of any affair, and that there's nobody who's going to corroborate his story.
But, like you said, if he lies, that plea agreement gets written, torn up, and he could face life in prison. So this is a really interesting back and forth about this. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break. When we come back, let's go a little bit back and talk more about the plot to kill Mike, Denise's alleged involvement, and how at one point she had cold feet. We'll be right back.
I can't remember when I called Denise. I think I called her immediately after I hung up with Mike, just to see, what is going on. I mean, because this isn't something you need to be wishy-washy about. And I can't remember if I talked to her that night or if it was the next day, but we talked very shortly afterward. And basically it was just a cold feet kind of thing. And she, got cold feet at the last minute. Forward with us or we're not. I mean, we're either going to be together or we're not. Like I said, the policy is ending. You got that anniversary trip coming up next weekend. Duck season is going to be ending soon. Do you want this to happen or not? I don't want to set these plans up if this isn't something, this isn't something you need to be wishy-washy about, I guess, basically. So at some point during the next week, it was decided again that, yes, this is what we were going to do.
You're talking about telling her you can't be wishy-washy, times are ending. We have a certain time frame you have to do this. And then it almost sounds like you were pressuring her into that. Would that?
Pressuring her.
Wow. Brad, one of the interesting things about it, so if you want the perfect witness, he would say, it was Denise's plan all along, she came up with it, she forced me, but he is saying she was wish-washy. She had cold feet. Wouldn't that lend one to believe that it seems more credible, the story?
I think so. I mean, I hate to say it, but I do think he's a credible witness. I mean, he's very consistent. He has great recollection. He doesn't sound like he's trying to say it was all her doing. She wanted it. He's actually saying she reconsidered and backed off, and I called her and said, oh, what are we going to do? Are we planning this or not? So it actually helps, I think, a lot to his credibility.
Isn't it possible, though, that he did this all by himself and then told Denise what happened? Couldn't you just imagine a scenario where he thought this is what she wanted? In fact, at one point in his testimony, he's questioned about, was Denise there with you when the killing happened? He goes, no, she was in my mind. Isn't it possible that this is what he thought she wanted, and then afterwards told her the truth? What would that, if that was the case, would she be facing this trial?
Well, she'd still be an accessory after the fact.
Would she?
Yeah, because of the cover-up. As soon as he would have told her, I killed your husband, and she didn't do anything about it, she'd become an accessory after the fact. But it is very possible that he came back and said, I killed your husband.
And that's just the fact that she knew about it and didn't go to the police. That's a cover-up. Now, let me ask you this. One of the questions that I had the opportunity to ask Ethan Way, her defense attorney, was the life insurance proceeds. He's like, she had no choice. She had to take that by law. Do you agree with that? That, in other words, we can't blame her for receiving those life insurance payout?
Well, we can't blame her for taking it, but the question is, why did she take it so soon? I think in Florida, it's 5 years before somebody's presumed from a missing person to being dead, and she did this after 6 months, and I think remarried after like 2 years.
So that timing is what makes this suspicious.
Yeah,
but then again,
she's too eager for it.
What happens if she just hated her husband?
Look, it's possible. And look, I personally don't blame her. If I had accepted the unfortunate fact that my spouse had passed and there was life insurance to collect, I probably would put it in as soon as legally permitted.
And the idea was that it wasn't like she...
No offense to my wife.
Right. No worries. The thing is like she didn't automatically know that he was dead. If according to her scenario, she just thought he was missing. And to do that so quickly, it seems suspicious.
Well, right, and if anything that Brian's saying is true, if she had any idea that he was going to, even if they did conspire, but if he ever mentioned it, she shouldn't have acted that quickly.
So many questions. Maybe we'll have more answers. When we come back, we're going to talk more about this trial and here on Female Felon Day on Law and Crime. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody, we have an update for you regarding that missing Colorado mother, Kelsey Bereth, 29 years old, who went missing back on Thanksgiving. ABC News has just confirmed that Patrick Frazee, her fiancé, has just been taken into custody. Sources have told ABC that the investigation unfolded rapidly in the last 48 hours, and police no longer believe that Kelsey is alive. I'm back here with trial attorney Brad Micklin. Brad, what does that tell you? The details are unfolding, but that can't look good. They must really believe he had something to do with this.
Right. And Colorado is a very rigid state. They have both the felony murder rule and the death penalty. So if he's a suspect in her murder, it's going to be a serious case.
Weird case, because we also was talking about Chris Watts, another Colorado father and husband who was implicated. I'm not sure what's happening, but this is just so sad.
Yeah, it's all these stories always have so many victims to it. It's not just the missing person, who obviously is the worst, but all the family and the children. It's horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, if we have more information or as it develops, we will, of course, update you. But again, this is just a little breaking development here in the disappearance of Kelsey Bereth. Okay, let's switch gears on our end and go back to Denise Williams. You just heard a little bit of a strange encounter that was described by Nick Williams. I want to continue on with his testimony, and Brad and I will break it down.
It'd be fair to say that your mother believed up until as recently as December of 2017 that your brother was going to come home one day, didn't you?
She held out every hope that he was alive somehow.
And she was not shy about expressing her belief that your brother was going to walk in the door one day.
Correct.
But since there's no set way to grieve with something, wouldn't it be also fair from the facts that Ms. Williams had an obligation to protect her daughter?
She did what she thought was right.
Nothing further.
Okay, let's break this down right now. So the Williams family, Brad, clearly didn't want to give up hope. Mike Williams' mother was writing letters to the governor. They wanted to open up an investigation. Do you find it weird that Denise Williams wasn't too happy about this? I mean, if she had nothing to do with the disappearance of Mike Williams, why would she seemingly be against this?
Well, and it could be like the cross-examination was suggesting that it's not healthy for the children or the daughter to keep hope that father's going to return. But I think it's more of what you're suggesting, is that she was involved either before or after, and it was just hard to keep up the charade. I
still want to go back to this because I can't get enough. The idea that she helped with the murder and the idea that she plotted the murder, for me, as I'm listening to it, still seems murky. But because this evidence doesn't quite prove that she knew anything before, but it could definitely show that she knew something after, right? At the very least, she was an accessory after the fact.
Right. I think that part's clear. I think whether or not she conspired with him to actually go out and murder him is not clear. I mean, we saw the snip of him testifying about their conversation, so she may have had knowledge that he was planning it, but I don't know if that raises to the level of conspiring together to commit it.
And we say clear, not necessarily that she'll be found guilty of that, but the idea that the narrative makes more sense here. Is it possible, though, that she really just had a really bad relationship with Mike, didn't care what happened to him, was cold-blooded, said, hey, he went missing, I'm done? Is that a possibility? And would that be an avenue that the defense should explore? Hey, she just didn't love him anymore. She didn't care what happened to him.
Well, there's a lot of avenues. I think they could say, Brian may have come back one time and said, I did this for you. I thought this is what you wanted. Or they could argue she was afraid because he murdered one person that maybe she would be the next one, which is why he later kidnapped her. But as soon as she came into any knowledge about it, she became a criminal after the fact.
Do you see a lot of these kinds of missing persons cases where the family doesn't want to let go hope that the person is still alive?
Unfortunately, not after 18, 19 years. I think most people resign long before that because it's just a healthy way for the family to move on.
You know, you say that, but I also was just thinking about the Kamaya Mobley case, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this girl that was taken from a hospital, and then she was reunited with her birth mother. You never know what happens in this world, and you can't give up hope, I guess, for when there's a disappearance, because his remains weren't found until 2017.
I think it depends on the facts, too. I mean, if somebody disappears in a shopping mall, there's a greater hope that they're going to be found somewhere else. But if somebody disappears in a swamp with alligators, I think you lose hope faster.
It was still eerie because a little bit later on in the program, we're going to be covering the Tammy Moorer case, and Heather Elvis disappeared and her body has never been found. So these kinds of cases are very eerie, but as you said, people who are implicated in other crimes can sometimes provide information about these unsolved mysteries, and we'll have to see. We're going to take a break, though. When we come back, we're going to play you the testimony of Cheryl Williams. This is the mother of Mike Williams, who, as we said, never gave up hope to try to find out what happened.
And I asked her, I said, "Where's Ansley?" Because I thought she was bringing Ansley to see me. And she said, "Ansley's taking a nap." Well, we invited her inside, and she sat down at the table across from me. Nick was standing, and Brian had his back to the door.
And what did Denise tell you?
Denise said, "Cheryl, you know that Ansley and I love you, but Brian and I don't like the lies you're telling about us." And I looked at her and I said, "Denise, what lies are you talking about?" Brian screamed, "You shut your mouth and let her talk." Nick got upset and said some not nice things to Brian. And then Denise is crying and she says, "Cheryl, if you will just stop this investigation, you can see Ansley again." And I told her, I said, "Denise, I can't stop this investigation. I wouldn't if I could." Nick said, "Denise, Mike is Mama's son and my brother, and we just want to know what you and Brian did to him." Brian said, "Denise, let's go. We're not getting anywhere." And they left.
Did you ever?
Ooh, that was a dramatic moment in the courtroom. Now, Brad, I mean, the idea that she would take away her daughter to see her grandmother, her uncle, because she doesn't want this investigation into what happened to Mike Williams to continue. And Brian Winchester allegedly getting so angry at this. I mean, what does that tell you if you're sitting on the jury?
Well, it strengthens the accessory after the fact claim that she's trying so hard to stop it. And it's unusual to take this kind of position. I mean, you're covering up a murder. You wouldn't argue to the mother of the victim to not investigate it. I mean, that's human nature. She's going to. There's nothing you're going to say that's going to stop it anyway.
Are you surprised she even tried to get her to do that? If you're trying to cover something up, you're making yourself look more suspicious and more guilty.
I agree, but I think knowing that the mother didn't let it go, that it was constantly in their face, that they were investigating, that she was pushing it, and I guess the fear of being caught just drew up more and more anger, more and more fear, and led it to bad behavior and judgment.
Isn't it crazy to think that if he wasn't engaged in an armed kidnapping of Denise, of course I'm talking about Brian Winchester, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be having this trial most likely.
Right. She turned him in. And I think the report was that he did it because he was afraid she would turn him in. So it's like he sealed his own fate, and for the both of them.
Yeah, we're going to get more into that in a second, Brad. Let's continue on, though, with Cheryl Williams, and this is when she was cross-examined by the defense. Take a look.
The first time that Denise confronted you was, I think you said it was in the summer of 2001?
Yes, sir.
And by then, a circuit judge had declared Mike dead by that time. Is that right?
Yes.
And by then, the family had had a memorial service for Mike.
Yes.
And is it fair to assume that Denise would have had to explain to Ansley, would have to deal with the fact that her dad wasn't home, and try to explain in the best way you could to a child what had happened?
Yes.
Now, if Denise is innocent and she thought that you were accusing her of doing something to your son, do you think it would be logical for her to be upset with you?
If she were innocent, yes.
So this was a reaction that she had that would be consistent with a person who's innocent.
Right.
Did you ever go to Cheryl's house on at Centennial Oaks after 2001?
Go to whose house?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I used your name. I meant to say Denise Williams. Did you ever go to Denise's house in Centennial Oaks after 2001?
Yes.
And did you see the pictures of Mike in the house?
No.
You didn't?
No.
You know what the great thing about covering all these trials is? You hear one really good argument, and then you kind of get cast doubt on it. Do you think the defense did a good job there at poking holes? Not quite holes, but another version of events of what happened, another theory, another way of looking at it?
I think so. There's just so many ways that you can cross-examine the victim's mother, especially at her age. But I think it was a really good point, not only that the defense tried to make, but that they got her to acknowledge that that is consistent with how people would act if they were innocent.
Yeah, she wants to move on with her life, and that it's difficult to hear what kept happening to Mike. Is that credible? Is that reasonable?
I think so. I think it's logical. I mean, again, people are going, like the defense lawyer alluded to, people are going to need closure, not just the family, but the extended family, the children, the members of the society. So I think it was a great point, and he was successful in establishing it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that is not the only thing that we're going to play for you, because when we come back, we are going to play you the testimony of another key witness, Kathy Thomas, Brian Winchester's ex-wife. We'll be right back.
Yes. Marcus is Brian Winchester's father, Marcus Winchester.
Okay. When you say, I'm not talking, is it referring that Kathy Thomas is not talking, or Denise Williams is not talking?
That Denise was not talking. She wanted me to tell Marcus, to tell Brian, that she wasn't talking. And she said, I'm not talking. But that was her saying that to me.
Okay. After that, at some point, did you start having communications with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE?
Yes.
Was there anyone in particular that you started communicating with?
William Micklin and Mike Devaney.
And at some point after that, did you agree to start working as a confidential source?
Yes, I did.
As part of that, were you given a way to make recordings?
Yes.
After that, did you ever confront Denise about what she asked you to do that week after the kidnapping?
Yes, I did.
Did you record that conversation?
Yes, sir.
Judge may approach.
Okay, before we get into the recording of that conversation, back here with trial attorney Brad Micklin. Brad, that was a huge moment, but I'm curious your perspective. The idea here that Denise allegedly told her to have this message communicated ultimately to Brian, I'm not saying anything. First impressions of that?
Well, I struggled with it for a little bit, because at first I thought, well, it's foolish. Why would she say that to a third person? It's like basically saying there's something that we're hiding. But then I thought about it, and we have to assume there was no contact between Denise and Brian because of the robbery.
Yes.
And
the kidnapping, the armed kidnapping,
right.
Yes.
And I'm told that Denise believed, or it's rumored that the kidnapping resulted because Brian was afraid Denise was going to report him.
About Mike.
The murder, right. So she's got a fear that now that Brian's being detained, that he's going to tell the story. So she has no choice but to tell somebody else to get to him, because she has to get the message to him.
Couldn't another way of looking at it is, hey, I'm not talking about what happened in the armed kidnapping. I'm not going to testify against you.
Well, that's what everybody else is saying, is that she never actually said, I'm not talking about the murder. She said, I'm not talking. She could have said, I'm not going to be a witness. I'm not going to cooperate with the prosecution. She could have said a lot of things, but she didn't.
Imagine being Denise Williams and you're sitting there and her good friend, Kathy Thomas, secretly recorded her to try to confess. What do you think's going on in her mind?
On whose mind?
In Denise Williams' mind. First, she has this woman who secretly recorded her. Brian Winchester, her former lover, ex-husband, testified against her. What do you think is going on in her mind right now?
I think she's terrified that the walls are crumbling down. Whether she was involved in it or conspired or learned about it afterwards, even if Brian said to her at the kidnapping, I'm going to implicate you, and it wasn't even true, she's still got to be terrified for her safety, both from Brian and from prosecution.
Well, let's listen to that recording right now again when Kathy Thomas secretly recorded Denise Williams trying to implicate herself in the Mike Williams murder. Take a look.
I'm back to it. Like, you know, you have to travel, and they can't get up there, all that kind of stuff.
The attorney that I talked to, he's just like a mortgage attorney.
Yeah.
So he said, he's like, you know, I could call. He's like, I don't do this, but I could call and see if you could do it over. You know, he's like, you would have to go somewhere where you would get sworn in, because the whole thing is like getting sworn in.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, well, you know, just let me kind of figure out what I'm going to do.
Because Andy had said that to you. Remember when you were going to get deposition? Yeah. That was a subpoena too.
Right.
But I don't know if they ever did it. But.
No, they didn't ever do it.
I just can't imagine that. What if somebody lived in Alaska or in another country or, I don't know, whatever.
I mean, I do know.
What do you know?
Well, do you remember back when all of that happened with you and Brian and Chuck in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Well, Brian called me at the shop crying and
before or
mad.
So the part that we didn't quite get to is where she basically says, she confronts her about that statement. What did you mean by, I'm not saying anything? She goes, yeah, well, you're not looking at it the right way. Now, Brett, she never denied it. She never really quite denied saying that statement. She didn't clarify. She didn't say on that recording, I had nothing to do with Mike. This had nothing to do with Mike. I didn't kill him. I didn't plot him. Brian had nothing to do with it. Why wouldn't she just clearly, flat out say to her friend, I don't know what you're talking about. I had nothing to do with this. And she didn't know that she was being recorded. But that's my question.
Well, there's a lot of ways it could go. Again, it could have been she conspired with Brian. It could be that she's afraid that Brian's going to come back after her once he's released. We didn't really get anything yet from her recordings to find out if it's true. It's clear she's not talking about the kidnapping. It's clear that it was something before, and she hasn't said what that is yet.
The little moment where she says, well, what do you know? Is that genuine when you're listening to it? Or does it sound like somebody who's nervous? You talked about the walls caving in.
It didn't sound natural, but we're sitting here knowing it's not natural. When she's on the phone, Denise was probably more consumed with what she was thinking, what Denise was thinking, and what Denise was going to say, than listening to the tone and intonation of who she was speaking with.
This is legal, though, these kinds of secret recordings. Is there any kind of issue with putting them forward into evidence?
Well, it depends on the state. I mean, it depends if there was a warrant or not, and whether or not it's a consent state or not. But then there's also an entrapment issue, and there's a lot of problems that come up with it.
Yeah, well, it did go in. The jury heard it. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to play you the defense's closing argument and the verdict in the Denise Williams case. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we're coming to the conclusion of our first trial here on Female Felon Day, and of course we're talking about the Denise Williams trial. I want to conclude right now with the defense's closing argument, and in my opinion, this was a very strong closing argument by defense attorney Ethan Way. Take a look.
It is never disputed that he did the crime because, ladies and gentlemen, he pled to it. He admitted he did it. So he takes her at gunpoint to do God knows what. With a gun, with a tarp, with a sheet, with bottles. What was he going to do with her? What was he going to do to her? But she talks him down. She calms him down enough to get him to let her go. This man who supposedly knows the deepest, darkest, most heinous secret that Denise Williams plotted and planned for the murder of Mike Williams. It is not your place, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to feel sorry for anyone. It's certainly not your place to feel sorry for the state attorney's office for the horrible decision they made to give the murderer a free pass. But as I was standing there and I was asking him questions, you remember that at every gratuitous opportunity he would say, we. His scripted moment, he would say, we. Because he could think that maybe that fat, fuzzy lawyer is going to get up there and that little snarky tone he takes, he's going to poke at me. So I need to be prepared for that. Because what am I? I'm a planner, and a salesman, and a murderer, and a liar, and an obstructor.
Okay, let's break down that defense closing argument. I thought it was strong. What did you think, Brad?
I mean, from a closing argument standpoint, I thought it was great. He was consistent. He had his theme. He worked through it, and he makes a great point. If she had conspired or participated in the murder, why would she go to the police with the man who knew that she conspired? But if you think it through, which the jury's going to, what other choice did she have? The man just tried to kill her.
Well, no, I mean, he makes a good point. If he tried to kidnap her, yes, she might not have any option to go to the police, but at the same point, you and I both know that it's interesting because of that comment that she made, right? Tell Brian I'm not talking, I'm not saying anything. So she's trying to do the best of both things, protect herself and also say, don't implicate me.
Right. I think what the lawyer should have done is tied the comment of I'm not talking to the kidnapping charge. I'm not talking about the kidnapping. I'm not going to prosecute it as a witness. I'm not going to cooperate with the prosecutor. They could have tied that together and justified or explained why she said that, and he didn't. I think he missed that opportunity.
Do you think it was a good move to say, hey, he was scripted, Brian Winchester? It was we, when really it's him. He's the one who killed Mike Williams. Do you think that was a strong point?
I do. I think the whole case for the defense is saying you have to look closely at him, which is why I think she didn't testify, but I think that was a mistake, too.
Yeah, and what do you think about the fact that she didn't testify?
I think it's bad. I mean, it's always problematic when you're a defendant, whether you testify or not. But I think a jury is always left with a question of, if she didn't do it, why didn't she get up and say that? And they're going to be instructed that they can't think that way. But she should have got up there. She needed to explain that she wasn't involved.
I'm going to ask you again, what was the evidence showing that she planned the murder, that she conspired, or that she was a principal in the murder? You tell me.
Well, the only thing we got from Brian's testimony was not that she didn't stop him from going, but that she encouraged him to go. Because remember, he was talking that they had a trip, but then she canceled it, and then she let him go the next week. So it sounds like she encouraged him to go on the second trip.
But it's all based on the testimony of one man. Is that enough?
It shouldn't be, no. So you should have to have corroboration other than the other guilty party.
Now remember, she was charged with murder, conspiracy, accessory after the fact. Jury had a big decision to make. What was their verdict? Let's see.
The verdict. Would you hand it to the bailiff, please? State of Florida versus Denise Williams. We, the jury, find as follows: as to count one of the indictment, the defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. As to count two, we, the jury, find the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. We, the jury, find as follows: as to count three of the indictment, the defendant is guilty of accessory after the fact of first-degree murder. It's been dated and signed by the foreperson. Ms. Idlet, did I accurately reflect the verdict of the jury?
Okay, so Brad, now I'll be the first to tell you I was surprised by that verdict. I thought she might be found guilty of accessory, but not the murder or conspiracy charge. And when we interviewed Ethan Way, he said he was shocked. He didn't think that the jury would come back clearly. I mean, her attorney. But that, again, what do you think the jury really held on to?
It's hard. I mean, it's surprising that she was convicted of both conspiring and concealing or accessory after the fact. If she helped commit it, then how are you an accessory after the fact? But I think juries
You can't have it both ways?
Well, in this case, you could, because the act, I think, was the covering of the body and the cover-up of the murder. But it's still a little surprising if you're sentencing them as almost committing the offense to say they're accessory. But juries don't always think just logically and rationally. They're also going to be torn by their emotions, and this is a horrible situation.
Do you think they were guided by the fact, what we kept talking about, that since Brian Winchester couldn't be found, couldn't be held responsible for what happened to Mike, that someone has to?
I don't know. I don't think that they were looking at it that way. I think this, if they took the story as true, you know, they have people who cheated on their spouses, conspired, took out insurance policies. I mean, it's just an ugly situation. It wasn't like they got into this affair and in a moment of passion took his life. They plotted to kill him for money, and it's hard for a jury to get past that.
You think she's going to have a successful appeal?
I think so. I think the lack of cooperation is very strong.
It's a very interesting case. Brad, I know we have to sign you off, so thanks for coming on, joining us on our new
Always
set.
a pleasure.
All right, let's talk about what we're going to be doing after our break. We are going to be covering the Yesenia Sesmas case, a woman who allegedly faked a pregnancy and allegedly kidnapped her coworker's baby and then shot her dead and stole that baby. This is a tragic, tragic case. And it also is an interesting one here in 2018 because she was an illegal immigrant, and that became a very big political conversation as well. So we're going to cover the Yesenia Sesmas case. I do want to let you know as well, we have a special new program here on Law and Crime. It's called Caught on Court Camera, and here in the spirit of ending 2018 and going into 2019, it captures all of the most exciting moments in a courtroom this past year. You're not going to want to miss that, and we'll see that a little bit later on in the program. So right now, we will take a break. When we come back, we're going to be covering our second trial on Female Felon Day. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.